welcome to the Sanctuary, safe space to speak from my heart. I'm your host, Israel, and my guest today is a wife, mother, financial expert, actually super really cool person that just integrates kink into her life. And I'm so excited to have her on the podcast today. SeaAphrodite, thanks for coming to the Sanctuary.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, I'm curious. I mean, you have such a huge following, but for me, I'm really curious where it started off. Like, what's the origin story of Sia Aphrodite?
Yeah, the making of a dom, right?
Yeah.
So, so I think there's a couple of things that led to, kind of my, being a pretty kinky person, pretty open sexually, and then also being a dominant. So the first thing that I always think of is sort of my upbringing and my kind of cultural background, which is not from the U.S. So I was
Mm,
born in the former Soviet Union, when it was the Soviet Union, and I was raised by people who don't have the same kind of, I don't know, like moral structures, I guess, as sometimes people have in the US around sexuality, where there's sort of religion and shame and guilt around it. I didn't have any of that. My family was very supportive of sexual exploration. Everybody was very open minded, very progressive about it, never equated it with anything negative, always just talked about kind of safety and self care, but not, like any kind of restrictions or any kind of judgment. So that was one thing. And that started for me at a very early age, and I'm actually doing the same thing with my own kids, just sort of being really accepting with it. The other thing that was really important is that I met my primary partner very early on. So Mr. SeaAphrodite and
mm,
I met when he was 16 and I was 14, and that was in 1997. So it's almost 27 years ago. And when we met, we were both virgins, we were both very inexperienced, and we basically grew up together. I mean, we grew up together as people, students and then kind of professionals later on as, kind of becoming adults. But we also grew up sexually together. And we experimented first just with each other and then with other people together and supportively. And he's just as sort of kinky as I am and just as open minded. And so we're just able to grow and support each other. And so having that kind of primary partner, having that safety, that stability, I think was also really important. And he's also a partner in crime. He's creative just like I am. So, we always were kind of thinking of new things to have fun with, and we've continued to do that. And then the last bit I think is around dominance. And I think that I'm just a very dominant person. I'm like the oldest child in the family, very controlling, very sort of alpha, very organized. I've always been a leader, both kind of professionally and personally. So I'm always in a position of being in charge. And
mhm.
so, from a sexual standpoint, I think it's similar. I like to be in control. But the other big thing for me, as I discovered this fairly early on, is that I don't really enjoy bottoming. Like I don't really enjoy any kind of penetrative play. It just isn't how my body functions. And so, not being a bottom naturally, not enjoying penetration, leads you to kind of be a top, right? It leads you to a lot of FemDom kinks, the first of which is just receiving oral sex or kind of, like face sitting. And so it kind of built from there. And I think the other piece of that sort of dominance is that because Mr. C. Aphrodite and I had a lot of experience early on, anybody else that we encountered, especially in our formative years, would naturally have less experience than us. And so we
Right.
we were naturally the kind of the guides, right? We were the ones who were leading, and that really just manifested forever, I think. So all those things came together. I would say the kind of cultural component, having that sort of strong partnership, and then just being just naturally inclined to kind of dominance and leadership in a way. All of that I think came together and built who I am.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And you guys have been together for such a long time. What would you say are some factors that play into keeping your relationship alive and so long?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question in general because obviously people, especially in the US, we have this really high divorce rate and relationships don't seem to last. I think for us, really importantly, is that because we met so young, the risk would have been that we would have just grown apart. And instead, we grew together. And so, because we weren't already established as people, if you meet your primary partner when you're in your 30s and you've already lived alone and you already are established as a person, and now you're trying to combine sort of two people together who are themselves already fully formed and quite different, and there might be some friction in some places, right? We never had that. We lived with our parents and then we moved out together. So we were the first kind of, we never lived alone. We always lived together. And we just developed together as people. So we're actually really symbiotic. I'm, as I said, very kind of alpha professionally, academically, was always very high achieving. And so I ended up being the kind of, out of the two of us, the working professional, I'm the one that supports the family. He is much more social, kind of much more nurturing. And so he ended up the partner who's home with our family, with our kids. And so we kind of carved out those realms for ourselves, the kind of professional realm, the kind of home realm. We don't compete with each other in those realms. We support each other. I'm able to do what I do professionally, to travel, everything, because he's home taking care of our household and our family. He's able to be where he wants to be, coaching sports, being really active with our children because I work and I, allow for him to be able to do that. So, like I said, we grew together. We grew in a way that was really aligned, where we're kind of symbiotic. We're two sides of one whole. And so at this point, we've built a life, where we obviously like bought a home together. We have children together. We've just kind of built a life that puts us really, like inextricably linked. We are a pair. We're basically like one unit.
Mm, mm, mm. So even though you are two different people that love two different things, you found a way to bring it together and make it work as this unit. That's actually aspirational. I love that, and I'm like, people need to incorporate that more, because like these days relationships are done like almost as quick as they start. But so you know had this upbringing, you meet someone early that complemented you, you have this symbiotic relationship. When did you, I guess, explore with other people?
Yeah, I would say that the first couple of years, so if you're going to do the timeline, it's from when I was 14 to when I was about 16, 17. We were exploring just together. So first we kind of lost our virginity, right? Then we're exploring other things. This was back in the 1990s, so you didn't have the same kind of access to pornography, or you couldn't order toys from Amazon. So we literally were like, right? We were reading the Playboy or the Penthouse Forum. We were reading Dan Savage's, Savage Love column in the Village Voice. We were going into the city and going shopping at sex shops together, like in person,
Wow.
physically.
Mm,
And so we were exploring toys and role play and, dressing up and all these sorts of things. And then at some point, it was interesting to say, we actually, what about kind of other people? And, there's a moment of sort of jealousy there. But what was really interesting is we approached it as kind of a pair, again, a unit.
mm,
And we had become so experienced ourselves between the two of us, that everybody around us was really, really inexperienced by comparison. So, in other words, like, if you think about the average 16-year-old girl or kind of boy, right, 16, 17, they're kind of fumbling around. They're trying to get
mm,
to first base.
mm-hmm.
And here we are, having had a couple of years of really great experience together where we really know our stuff. And so it was almost like natural that we would kind of go out and almost teach others. And I mean, to be completely candid, I had a number of friends that I took their virginities, right? Because
Mm,
I knew what I
mm,
was doing. And he did the same thing. And so we didn't always play together. We kind of played separately. He played with women, I played with men.
mm-hmm.
Um, and then by the time I got into college, I was sort of bi-curious. And that was really the first time that he was really supportive for obvious reasons, but not pushy. He didn't try to muscle in. He was just, okay, you want to explore with other women, I support you. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
at some point he got invited in. So that was our first experience of having kind of group play,
For obvious reasons.
obvious reasons. But he did it the right way, like the way
Right,
that,
right,
man should. And
right.
so that was our first experience of group play. And
Mm,
then, I mean, just if you want to keep following the thread, because we started playing with women, I'm very much, again, kind of a top and dominant personality.
mm-hmm.
He bought me my first strap on. and and my
Ah.
first harness. And I actually still have my first strap on, my first harness from the year 2000.
You should have a museum of these things, like, cause
Yeah.
holy shit, that's a wow from 2000.
From 2000. It was a very high quality harness that I think
God
they don't
damn.
even make anymore.
Right.
And my original strap, which is a 7-inch piece, which is really great. And so I was using it on women originally. And then I started using it on men. And so that was, I think, the beginning of the next phase of kind of what dominance looked like for me. And that was happening in college, right? So like it's been a really long, like it's been a long journey. It hasn't always been consistent. There have definitely been ebbs and flows. There were a period of years where I was, having my children, and they were very young, where we really didn't do as much. We were not as active. So I
Mm.
would say we were very active for about a decade before we had the kids, and then since they've gotten a little bit older, we've gone back to being pretty active again.
Wow. 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 I mean, it's great that I think having someone that you're exploring over time with, just you're both growing and evolving together. So you always have this rock, like
Yes.
this home base that you
Hmm.
can always come back to. So that makes it wonderful. But so you have this work, hectic, being in the financial world. How do you, I guess, how did you start finding partners that you play with?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we years ago it was like different. There was something called Lava Life. There was something called Adult Friend Finder. There was obviously Craigslist. Back in the day.
Mm,
I've gotten more risk averse, I would say, just because I've kind of built a graduate degree, a career, family. Like all those things make you a bit more risk averse. You're more kind of
definitely.
careful. And then I found FetLife, and FetLife has been really fantastic for me because I think about it and I treat it as a community of
Mm,
kinksters. And so rather than just kind of anonymity, right, on a dating site, I do think about it as a community, and I look for people who are kind of focused on it as a community, who want to grow in the community. And so that's how I sort of approach, right? I host events, and it's always very word of mouth. It's always like friends of friends. And, that's how we sort of build the community. There's a great community of women in New
mm,
York now that I'm plugged into. And then I build my own community of male partners who take different roles in my scenes. So I would say it's
mm,
predominantly FetLife, a little bit on Field, which is another app. But I sort of, even there, if I meet somebody on Field, I kind of bring them over to FetLife. I sort of say, can you come here and kind of establish yourself in this place, because I want it all in kind of one location. And so that's, I think, where, I mean, not I think, for sure, that is where kind of we find our partners, is on the FetLife platform. And it's because you're looking for that real alignment of people who are really, kink oriented, kink
mm.
positive, and are focused on a community of kink.
Okay, let's thanks for sharing that. Let's break it down a little bit. Some of the things that you mentioned, like, okay, being a woman that's like, yeah, this is really not for me. So you're leaning more towards the dom side. You mentioned face sitting, oral. What are there other, I guess, kinks that you're into?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I list my kinks out, right? I've written a series of articles for Lifestylers magazine. So the number one kink for sure is the kind of oral worship, and that has all these different, variations to it. Obviously, face sitting, but all types of oral worship. I also really enjoy pegging and kind of anal play for men. Again,
Mm,
that's part of me being the penetrative partner, kind of being
mm,
the top partner. I mean,
mhm.
I do that with women too. Obviously, I use the strap on women, but I like using it on men. And part of that is because it's pleasurable for me. There's the friction of the harness, and that's
Ah,
the other way that I'm able to orgasm, right, outside of oral service, is through pegging. And then I really, really like forced bi. So forced bisexuality, I mean, we have to establish, obviously, that very, very few things are really forced in the sense that somebody doesn't want them at all, because that's obviously non-consensual and you wouldn't want to be doing that. So Forced by is more like coerced or encouraged, I would say, where somebody has a latent fantasy of doing something bisexual. And again, there's different variations of that. And I'm really encouraging that. And part of that is it's happening for me. It's like it's happening in my presence. It's happening because I'm watching. It's happening because I'm guiding. And the people involved probably wouldn't do it on their own if I wasn't there. Like
Mm.
they would normally just, be with women, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because I'm there and it turns me on and it's something that excites me, they're kind of willing to engage in it. And part of it for me is almost like you're proving to me how much you desire me because you're willing to do something that you otherwise wouldn't do in order to
Mm.
please me. And I think that, things like pain, for example, can have the same characteristics, right? You're taking pain in order to please me, right? You're doing whatever it is that you're doing in order to please me. So I do like pain. I impact top, although Mr. C, I would say, likes it more than I do and does a better job probably of it. I also like bondage. I started out with just cuffs and I'm doing a lot more with rope now. So I'm enjoying the kind of beauty of rope. Um, and then cuckolding is an interesting one because again, because I don't really bottom very often. It's not like a hot wife and cuckold sort of dynamic where you're, as the cuck, you're watching your hot wife partner have sex with other men and maybe be submissive to those men but dominant to you. For me, it's much more
Mm.
as like a femdom, and then you have a submissive partner, and then I will co-top effectively with sort of more dominant male partners.
So it's like kind of you are playing you are on top of two people in a way at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. So then you're playing with humiliation and you're playing with like sort of degradation, right? You're playing with like the humiliation of of submissive males, right,
Mm.
versus more dominant. So, for example, I'll match, like sometimes an older daddy type of male with a younger, like like in his early 20s sort of boy, and then the older male and I will sort of top the boy, and so there's a kind of a mommy and daddy sort of kind of thing to it.
Mm.
Another variation is race, right? Related, but you'll have like a submissive who's white and a dominant who's black, right? And so there's a desire to serve BBC, right? And so I'll kind of facilitate that. So it really depends on the people. I mean, sometimes I will just have two submissive boys or three submissive boys together, for me. So that sometimes we don't even have a dominant male. Sometimes I am just the only dominant like male in the room. But it just sort of depends, I think, on the fantasies that people have and how they want to explore them. I'm actually, we can get into this, but I'm extremely fantasy driven. I'm not a
Mm.
I'm not a kink machine. I don't like being kind of a kink dispenser per se. But that's only as regards kinks that I don't personally like, right? So if somebody's approaching
Right.
me for something that I don't want, but if it aligns with my own desires, then all of a sudden it doesn't feel like kink dispensing. It feels
Mm.
like facilitation, and
Yeah, yeah.
like fantasy facilitation is super hot. And part of it, I think, or I know, has to do with memory and the idea of memorability, the power of memory. So if you have someone who's had a fantasy for a long time and you facilitate and realize that fantasy with that person for the first time, they're never going to forget you. And so if you think about me in high school where I was taking virginities, those
Mm.
people will never forget the first person they had sex with. And
Mm-hmm.
then when I was in college, I was playing with women for the first time, and it was women who had never been with other women. So that's their first sort of, lesbian or bisexual experience. They're never going to forget that.
Mm.
And then if I peg a man for the first time who's been wanting to be pegged, that's mine. I own that, right? That's the first experience he's had of being penetrated by someone, and it's mine.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's been fantasizing about forced by or kind of servicing another man, and I'm the person he does that for, again, that's kind of forever. So I think those things do drive me, that kind of facilitation of fantasy, realization of fantasy, and especially fantasies that are happening for the first time are really kind of delicious for me. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with that kind of concept of ownership, the owning of memory. I mean, you're not owning people long term per se, although I have a few relationships that are kind of like master slave based. But the ownership of memory is really hot. It's really exciting. So a lot of that drives me, I think.
So in like this way, I mean, you are not a dispenser for sure, but you are this person that is etched into their memory and pretty much their life because you've given them this thing they've been searching for or didn't know it was possible, and then you brought it from their minds to the real world.
Yeah. And if you look at my FetLife, there's almost 4,000 photos now. And so the art piece of this, the kind of commemorating these things, completely anonymous. I don't show faces. I don't show tattoos. I don't show, scars or any other kind of, identifying characteristics. I'm really careful about making everything completely anonymous. So it's just bodies and not
Mm-hmm.
people. But the idea of commemorating these first time experiences or these, these kind of new experiences, showing them, there's a community exhibitionism kind of aspect to it. Some people want to be tagged because they're really excited to be seen. Some people want to do it completely anonymous, not be tagged. But that component, I think, of like the art form is really important to me too. And if you look at some of the scenes, I mean, I'm always sort of creating new, I don't know, like new combinations, or dressing people up in different ways and
Mm.
combining their bodies in different ways and sort of setting up, scenes that I haven't done before, tying people together in certain ways, whatever it is, like there's definitely that part of it that kind of, it's not going to be forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And you're trying to create something that is sort of unique, right? And it's easier with people who don't have a lot of experience because everything is new for them.
Mm.
And it's obviously more challenging with people who are very experienced kinksters because there's very little, right, that you can sort of add on top of what they've already experienced. So there's that sort of, I think, spectrum too, where I definitely prefer like kind of newbies,
Mm.
because it's exciting to be able to do those things for them for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is enlightening. That's really
Mm-hmm.
enlightening. So, when actually, let's keep it really basic. What is kink to you?
It's interesting. So I think it's like cathartic and it's like therapeutic. I think I've said before to folks, I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't even drink coffee. Like so, no caffeine, no alcohol, no tobacco, no drugs, no prescription medications. I don't go to a therapist. I do exercise. That's very good for me mentally. And so I think kink is kind of the place where I put a lot of my, the daily life. I mean, I work in a very stressful career, in finance. I'm raising children, which everybody knows can be very stressful too. Like, all the real life stuff. I think I channel it into kink, and the creation of again sort of experiences for myself, right? I mean, I obviously had a lot of experiences, so you're always thinking of kind of what's a new thing that I can try, but experiences for others that I'm attracted to and interested in. It's just exciting, and I find that when I'm done with a scene, right, when I've sort of done something and it's exciting, like it's worked out the way that I wanted it to, and the people have been, really into it. I mean, there's just this incredible feeling of sort of catharsis. So it's definitely a hobby. It's definitely some kind of art form because I definitely enjoy the kind of commemoration and then the exhibition of it.
Mm.
And then it's like I said, it's also some human connection. I mean, I definitely have built real relationships through it as well with people who want to be connected to me in a more kind of long term way.
Mm. Mm. And how do you vet people, right? Because at the end of the day, it's still the internet, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you have this high profile job, so.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. One is I tend to look for people who are similar to me, who are also very conscious of their kind of anonymity, their real identity. So I find that a lot of the women that I kind of interact with are similar. They're very educated. They have high profile jobs. They're just trying to sort of practice kink very privately, and they're just very aligned to me. And then in terms of men, again, it ranges, right? Some of the younger partners are in college,
Mm.
And so, but usually they're very high achievers, right? They're doing well in school. They're going to be building a career in the future. So they're very conscious. They want to protect that future career as well. And then
Mm.
the older partners are like me. They're highly educated professionals in sort of different, different disciplines, people that I would respect normally, even in the vanilla world. And that's how we think about it, is we keep each other safe, right? It
Mm.
gives us an opportunity to live out that part of ourselves and basically take care of one another. And
Mm-hmm.
I've been very lucky because I have chosen well, and have built networks, as I said, where it's like, you trust someone and
Right.
they have a partner that they trust, and so you build it through
Yeah.
kind of word of mouth. And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
people now, we host events, that are kind of larger scale, thematic, themed events, and people invite their partners, and we kind of build those guest lists very carefully. And
Mm.
people are quiet about it. They obviously at some point will figure out who I am, but they'll keep it quiet. And so it's been really positive from that perspective, is that kind of vetting process of really looking for people who are similarly minded.
Mm.
I stay away from, I mean, with all due respect, I have no problem, obviously, with people who are sex workers or people who are content creators or people who are monetizing kink, in different ways. But I tend to stay away from that in my own network. So, people
Mm.
who have, an education and professional jobs and who only treat kink as something fun on the side that they keep private, I would say that's how I choose my partners.